Hi, I'm Barb Green. I am so glad you're here with me in my kitchen. Today we're gonna make a homemade apple pie from scratch. Stick with me, don't be scared. I said the word pie, and I know lots of my friends are afraid of making pies. The crust is complicated, sometimes the fillings are difficult, but I promise I'm gonna show you an easy way to make a pie that you can be proud of to take to your next family gathering or even serve to your family. So we're going to hold off on the filling for now. If you take the apples and you peel them right now and you add the sugar and the spices, once you do that, the apples start producing water, and we don't want a really watery mess to put into our pie crust. So for now, I'm putting these beautiful Granny Smith apples aside, and we'll pick those up in a minute. We're gonna start with our crust. So I'm gonna grab a bowl here. I use Crisco. And in another episode, we'll actually do an all butter recipe. But for today, for the sake of ease, Crisco is much easier to work with. It has an elasticity to it. It really makes a nice flaky, tender crust. Every time I make a homemade pie, someone actually will ask, did you really make this crust yourself? You'll learn to love it, and we will do a butter one at some point. So the crust recipe is actually 3 cups of flour, 1 cup of Crisco. You'll need 1 cup of ice water. I have some ice water behind me here. We will just remove the ice cubes when we're ready. And then 1/4 teaspoon of salt for flavor. So if you don't have a scale, I would encourage you to pick one up. A scale is going to be one of your best friends when you're baking. It helps you get exact measurements. We are measuring 370 grams of flour. That is 3 cups of flour if you don't have a scale. Just put this on here, turn it on. This is one way to keep your flour light and aerated. 370 grams. If you're using a measuring cup, I will say this. I'm going to teach you some tips and tricks along the way. Never just scoop your flour. You always want to spoon if you're using measuring cups. If you scoop, you're adding way more flour in there because it packs in, and whatever you're making is going to end up drier because you've added too much flour. If you use a scale, you get the exact amount without having to worry about that at all. So I'm going to put this aside. The next thing that we're gonna do is add in 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And that's just for flavor. And I'll whisk that up so that the salt is incorporated all through the flour. And then we're adding 1 cup of Crisco. You can buy Crisco in a can, and you can spoon it out into a cup. Today I was at the store and I decided this seemed like an easier idea. So 1 cup of flour, oops, spilled a little. And then we're ready to mix. So I'm gonna grab a pastry blender. I would highly recommend that you pick one of these up if you don't have one. You can do this with 2 knives, you know, kind of like the, but it's not as easy. This is so much easier, and it cuts it into little bits. So you're gonna end up with little bits of fat covered with flour. And you don't wanna be too aggressive either. Flour has, once water touches flour, the gluten in it activates, and it can actually start to get it tough. So I will say, once we add the water into this, we wanna be gentle, but even in this process, it's good just to be gentle. Don't be too aggressive. One of the things you also don't want to do is, I've seen this done, you know, just grinding it up with your hands. Your hands can be warm and you're smashing all the little bits. Here's what you want in the end. I just want you to see that. Hopefully you can get a good, there's some larger bits in there and there's some smaller bits. That's about the consistency you want for this pie crust. So what you want to do is, for now, you just want to drizzle some of the cold water in there. I'm glad I'm spilling on my table. And then you just want to gently, again, this is where it's crucial, just to be gentle with the dough that's in here. So we're tossing it around, and basically we're just trying to get all the dry particles to come together. I'm so glad you're here with me. This is one of my favorite things to do, is to bake. It's been my lifetime passion, and I certainly hope that I can pass on to you some things that you're gonna end up just loving. So it's starting to come together. You can see clumps forming. That's a good thing. We're getting really close here. There's still a little bit of dry there, so I'm gonna add just a little more water. And this should just about do. And you'll notice even this, it's tempting. I'm not using my hands because my hands are warm, and I don't want to melt or mash any of those tiny little bits of fat that are covered with flour. I don't want to mash them up, and I don't want to melt them. I want them to stay as cool. I'm bumping this, it's cold, and that's how I want it to stay. The key to this crust is a lot of the crusts, you have to refrigerate them for an hour or a half hour before you can even use them. We don't have to do that with this, as long as we can just keep it cool. And I can tell just by feeling it, it's nice and cool, and that's exactly what we want. So we're just about ready to roll our dough out. I'm going to show you what this looks like. You can see there's really no crumbles left in there. This is a perfect, beautiful consistency to roll out and start our pie crust. The next thing that we're going to do is one of my favorite things that I own, and it's really, really simple, inexpensive. They might be, I don't know, $10 or $15. This mat is the best thing. If you don't have one, I'll have a link for this one. I mean, you can pick them up anywhere. They're not expensive, and they're the best thing to have, especially if you're baking. Like when you have to put flour on the countertop, if I put it on here, maybe someone was cutting onions on the counter, that flavor is going to transfer. I've actually had fruit that tasted like onion before, so I invested in one of these. This is for baked goods only, and I use it all the time. You put a little bit of flour on it. If for some reason this dough would get warm, you can actually, once you have your dough out, you can actually just pick this up, wrap the whole thing up, and stick it in the fridge. And cleanup is really, really nice too, rather than scraping it off of the counter, which I've done before. You just pick this whole thing up and you can take it right to the trash can. So highly recommend this. This one actually has the inches. If you're following a recipe that says a 10-inch pie, you can actually see the circles on here where you roll to 10 inches. So let's get started. I usually take about 3/4 of the dough. There's no need to roll the whole thing out. This is going to make 2 crusts, so I just reserve a little back. I am not mashing, I am gently bringing this together. You kind of want to make it into a disc, and it can be kind of loose. Again, I don't want to get it too warm, and I don't want to melt it or anything. Grab a rolling pin. So you want to flour the rolling pin. Flour's our friend here. You start rolling from the center out. You always want to make sure you have enough flour underneath. You'd be really sad, and so would I, if I hear that your crust stuck to the mat. This will keep absorbing the flour, so just keep checking that. Again, don't push hard, be gentle, and just keep rolling from the center out. Just keep doing that. we're making, we'll probably make like a 10-inch circle, maybe 11-inch. We'll see where this goes. I don't know if you can see the consistency as much as I can, but you can see all the little ripples of the little bits of fat in there and then the swirls of flour. This is actually beautiful. It's turning out really nice. About this size, I usually flip this back and see how easy it is to work with. It's very elastic. Sprinkle more flour there. After all this work, you certainly don't want it sticking. Flip the other side over and just add more flour. And then I typically add a little more on here. Make sure your rolling pin has lots of flour on it, and just give it one last roll. So you can see this is about how thick it is. I mean, it's... Okay, so that wasn't so hard, right? I'm gonna show you what to do next. Got our baking dish here, and I can show you two different ways. I've been doing this a long time, so I'm very, very comfortable. But again, if this is your first time, it's kind of scary working with pie crust and you don't want to stick your fingers through it or ruin it. So you can fold it over like this, and then you can just lightly put your fingers underneath and you can pull it right on and you're in, you're golden. If you're afraid to do that, and I would completely understand if it's your first time, right where it is, again, if you have this mat, you can just kind of guide it on there. You get it on your rolling pin, and you can always just lift it over this direction, which is not something I typically do. I make a disaster, but that's another way you can do it. You never want to stretch it or pull it in any way. If you do that, it will bite back, and when you're baking it, it will shrink back. So you just want to gently nudge it in to place, and not pulling on it, but allowing it just to find its own little way in there. Okay, so this is looking just beautiful. Now the next step is we want to trim the edges, because we certainly can't be working with this floppy bit. Just use a simple butter knife, and I go by my knuckles right here. So I hold my hand under, lift the crust up, and I simply find that spot, and I just go the whole way around and just keep trimming the extra. And when you're done, you have a nice even amount the whole way around the pie. So here's the next tip I want to show you, and don't skip this. This is really important. So when we go ahead and put the next crust on top, we want to make sure that it seals, that these two crusts seal together. And so I take my extra water, you dip your fingers in it, and you want to go the whole way around and just touch the edge with the water. This is nice ice cold water. As we're doing the next crust and as we're preparing the apples, this little bit of water is kind of sitting on here and making it kind of sticky. And so this is going to make a really nice seal for the crust on top. When we put it on, it'll kind of just stick and it melds it together. This is a good way to keep from your pie boiling out into your oven. If you've ever had that happen, it's not very pleasant. If you're having company and now there's burning pie filling in the bottom of your oven and the alarm is going off and it stinks, I've done that once only. Don't skip this step. I'm gonna put that aside. Now we just need to do the second pie crust, just like we did the first one. I try to incorporate the scraps, they're still nice and moist. I just kind of press it together a little bit, and you're doing the very same step again. So we have our second pie crust ready, and our first one is ready for the apples. And so now we're going to just put this aside. As soon as we get our apples done, then we can just put this right on top. For now, I'm gonna move this, just give me a moment. I'm gonna clean up and get ready for the apples. Okay, so step 2, we're doing our apples. So Granny Smith is what I typically use. You can use, there's Cortland, there's Honey Crisp, there's several different kinds. I try to stick with Granny Smith. They're not real sweet and they stay firm, but when you bake them, they do cook down. They'll retain their shape, but some apples will just turn to mush. And so, you know, I prefer to use this. I do cook this pie until these are soft and tender and yummy. I don't like a pie that has crispy fruit in it, so these do cook down nicely. You want to peel these. This is a little Y peeler. If you're comfortable with that, you can use this. And you just want to get 8 to 10 apples peeled. And if there's any kind of vegetable peeler, if that's what you want to use, there's this kind, there's the flat kind, if you prefer that, whatever you have at your house. Sometimes I just use a paring knife. If you're comfortable doing that, you can also do it this way. So go ahead and peel about 8 to 10 apples, and then we'll cut them up. All the apples are peeled. Put these cups aside. So now you have 2 choices. You can take this and you can slice it, and then just cut it into little wedges. Or you can simply take a knife like this and just cut the flesh from the core. Either way, the core needs to go. So whatever you're more comfortable with. This is probably an easier step. Coring an apple can be kind of tricky. So once you're done, you're just going to have a bunch of pieces like this that will turn into slices. Okay, so all of your apples are pared. Now would be a good time to turn the oven on to 375 and get it preheating. And we're going to go ahead and we're just going to slice these. I would say when you're slicing them, and this does not have to be exact, if some are thinner and some are thicker, within reason, they'll just hold their shape, but they're still going to cook down. The thinner ones might get just a little bit softer, but the mixture in overall is, it turns out just delightful. So you just want to cut them into little, like 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch pieces, no more than that. So we're going to go ahead and just cut all of our apples. You can see, I mean, I'm not being exact, but I'm trying, just get them as close as you can between that 1/4 and 1/2 inch mark. Okay, so we have a beautiful bowl of apples cut up. You can see they all vary in size a little bit, but they're basically in around the same range. So now we want to add a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. That just gives it a really nice caramely flavor. We want to add a 1/2 cup of white granulated sugar. And then we're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, and this is to taste. You can add a whole teaspoon if you want. A 1/4 teaspoon is about my tolerance, but if you really, really love cinnamon, you could add a whole teaspoon in. You can also add things like cloves or nutmeg, or you can even add raisins and different things. I mean, this is a pretty basic recipe, but I like just to stick to the basic plain apple pie. So we just want to give this a stir. Basically, we're just trying to get all the apple pieces coated with our lovely little sugars and cinnamon here. Again, the benefit to this is waiting. It hasn't been sitting long. It's not watery. It's going to be really nice and dry, and it'll go right into the pie crust now. Okay, so the last step is we're going to add in 1/3 cup of flour, and this is for thickening. If we don't add that, we'll have apple soup in a crust. So again, we're just kind of coating this. That's looking pretty lovely. It's so interesting. You can see just all the longer the sugar has been on here, the apples are starting to draw moisture. So we want to get it into the pie shell quickly and get it into the oven. Since we put the sticky on the edges and this is just ready to meld with the other crust, you want to make sure as you're putting this in that you're not dropping it on the edges. You want those to just stay clean. So you can dump it in however you want. Get this filling into the pie shell. You don't want to dump it from really high up because it could potentially put a hole in the bottom or dent the sides. I usually just kind of spoon it in. You can see it's filling this just perfectly. You don't want the pie too full that it's overflowing, and you certainly don't want it too low or you have a big dip in your crust when the pie's all done. It will puff up some while it's baking, and then it'll settle down once the steam relaxes in it. So now we bring our other crust back over here and let's get this on top. And again, you can, if you would like, you can use your rolling pin to place it on. And if you want to try and be brave, you can pick it up with your hands and just place it right on top. Again, don't stretch it, just place it gently on. You don't ever want to force it to do anything. Gently just guide it over, and there your top crust is on. We're going to go ahead and trim the edges again. The same way we did the bottom crust, you can actually, if you put your hand under this, you can actually feel the other crust. So use that as your guide and just follow the whole way along. Trim, trim, trim the whole way around the pie. And we're almost done. Okay, now I'm just gently pinching. You want to make sure that this actually seals, not hard, just lightly so that you're getting these two together. Next step is fold this under. And you just want to go the whole way around. You're folding it the whole way around. Okay, this is all folded under. Last step. Take your two fingers and your pointer finger. You just place them here. And this is basically just giving it that pretty crimp. You want to go around the whole pie and give it that extra finishing little touch. There are other ways that you can finish the pie off. You can use a fork, and there's different things that you can do, but I kind of like this traditional, I don't know, it looks like a grandma finish. Look at that. Is that not beautiful? You want to make sure you cut vent holes in the top. This thing steams and bubbles and cooks like crazy in there. If you don't give it vent holes, the stuff will find a way out, and it will be, in an unfortunate way, it finds its way out. So you want to put vent holes in. I usually do. Hopefully you can see that. I usually do like 5 X's just to make sure. And halfway through the baking, I actually check those vents and make sure that they're open and the steam is coming out of them. If for some reason they get closed, you just want to prick them again with your knife. Very important that those stay open and the steam is able to escape. And here's my last finishing touch. Every pie I make, if it's apple, I put an A. If it's a peach, I put a P. And there we have an unbaked apple pie. Right before we put it in the oven, I want to say one last thing. When you're baking, this bakes very, very slow. This bakes very fast. So your crust is going to burn before this is done. So one of the things that you can do is foil if you don't have a pie ring. I have pie rings because I use foil for years, and it just takes a little longer to do, but I'm going to grab my foil and show you what you can do if you don't have a pie ring. Take a piece of foil, fold it, and basically kind of round it so that it'll go around the pie, the edge of it. And you want to do this the whole way around the pie. So basically you're fitting this around the crust, and then you grab another piece, you do the same thing. It usually takes 3 pieces. Basically what you're doing, you're shielding it from the heat. Otherwise this crust will burn and you'll be tempted to take it out early because the crust is burning. You have to give the inside long enough or it will be undone when you take it out. The flour that's in there needs time to boil and thicken before you take it out. I have a pie ring, and I'm going to put a link in the description below. I would highly recommend you get these because look at that. It took me all of 1 second to cover, and that will shield the crust from burning. This just takes a little longer and it's a little cumbersome. So I would highly recommend you pick one of these up. And it just protects your pie when you're baking it. Off to the oven we go. It is preheated and ready for our pie. You're going to bake that for about an hour, and we'll have a piece of pie in a moment. Okay. So it's been about 30 minutes, and like I said earlier, we want to make sure that those vent holes in the pie are open. Sometimes they actually just fold in and they'll close up. We want to make sure they're open. When the pie starts really getting hot and it really starts bubbling, a lot of steam comes, and we want to make sure that those vent holes are open. So I usually just make a little bit of a check on it to make sure. So as you can see, they are all still open, and this smells incredible. If anything was closed there, I would go ahead and just take my knife and just stick it right down in those holes again to make sure they're open. So now we just wait another 30 minutes. Smells so good, I can't wait till it's done. So the timer's going off. Let's just give it a check. I did use a stoneware pan, and they typically take a little longer on the timing, so we just want to actually listen to what the pie's telling us here. You'll hear it if it's bubbling. Take a peek here. I can hear it bubbling. Do you hear that? That's a beautiful thing. It's in there boiling away. That means that filling that we put in, the flour, the sugars, they're all bubbling and boiling, and that will give it the thickening that it needs. So we're going to give this about 10 more minutes, I think, and then it should be about done. So our apple pie is ready. I can't wait. Let's get it out of the oven. Take a look. Ooh. I wish you could smell this. I really, really do. It's bubbling and beautiful. Can you hear that? I'm gonna go ahead and put this right here and take the shield off. It's piping hot. It smells delicious. The crust turned out just perfect. I see all the little flaky goodness in there. I can't wait to cut into it. We will let this sit for probably at least an hour to 2. This takes a long time to cool down, and then we'll cut a slice open and see how it looks on the inside. So our pie is cool and ready to be cut. I can't wait to taste it. This seems to be everybody's favorite when I make it. I'd love to hear what your favorite pie is in the comments. If you have any questions, feel free to comment. I love to talk baking. I will have a link to the recipe in the description below. Look at that. I can see all the layers of the apples in there. I get to have a bite. So good. I can taste the tartness of the apples and then the flavors of all the sugars and the sweet in there blending together. This crust is so tender and flaky. We did a good job. So this has been fun. I hope you enjoyed baking with me. I enjoyed baking with you. I'll see you in the next video.